All right, guys, welcome to the Hard Money Show, where we talk about home loans, real estate, and media. I'm super excited, guys, to finally get this podcast off the ground. We have Lisa Abelgas. That's right, I got that right. She's super excited. She's smiling over there. I had to ask her 12 times how to pronounce it. But we're really excited to have her on. We work together. We're partners. She's handling the real estate. I'm handling the LO side. But we're going to go ahead and get into this. We're going to ask her, Lisa, are you excited to be here?
I am. Yay.
I know. Look at her face. She's so excited. So I wanted to ask, what was your experience like first getting into real estate? Because I know you've been in the industry for a while, right?
Yes.
When did you get started in real estate?
Ooh, we're going to go all the way back to 2003.
2003. Let's see. I would have been in a freshman in high school.
So I was a college student, Chabot College, junior college in the Bay Area. And I was doing general ed and I was taking courses. It's kind of ironic because I was a young mom, so I already had, children. And so at the time, my husband and I had just been married, still in school. And we were talking about buying a house because we were being influenced by the family. Like, hey, you guys are a young couple, but you guys should establish yourself, right? So
good advice, at least.
It
right?
was great advice.
Were any of them in real estate?
Actually, his mom dabbled in a lot of like real estate, but for her own. Like, she owned a few properties in the Bay Area.
Right.
So she was versed in the industry just by having like the right connections and contacts,
sure.
right?
Okay, that's good.
So I was taking classes. I stumbled across like real estate courses, right. And I was like,
in college.
See,
this is one of the things that I always thought was really interesting about you, is that you actually did it in college.
I know.
Which most people, they just go through, a licensing education course or whatever, not through university.
Right.
And you did it like a legit way, because you can get a degree in real estate.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting here and we're in this huge auditorium going through the motions of the class. And I remember like towards the end, the professor said, hey, you can get your license, right? And I'm sitting there taking notes. I'm like, license? Like, what would I do with the license,
Right.
And I'm thinking, I was taking it because I was thinking about buying my first house. And I didn't really know anything about homeownership. And I thought by taking these classes, I would learn,
right.
But then I got curious. I remember going all the way down, to the platform after the course and asked him, like, what do you mean by a license? Like, what can I do with that? And he's like, well, you can become a real estate agent and sell houses. And I'm like, really? So that was like, that planted the seed.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we did buy our first house up here in Sacramento, actually. Didn't know anything about the area.
What'd you pay for your first house, if you don't mind me asking?
$230,000.
$230,000.
Yeah.
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 And now that house is probably like a $400,000 now.
This is a story I tell. I'm like, when I talk to clients now, we'll delve into this later, but when they talk about interest rates jumping, I'm like, you have no idea. Like, when I bought my first house, I had a 720 credit score, first time home buyer. I thought 5.5% was amazing, on a 30-year fix. Like, I was ecstatic about it. I was like, so it's crazy to think where we are today, right?
Right.
But that's a whole different story, so we'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
Yeah, but going back to my story, so we bought the house brand new. When it was completed, moved up here. I had already scheduled, like, the test.
Right.
Mind you, back then, there was no computerized testing. It was all paper, right?
Paper test.
So I got this test date. I have no family out here except for, like, this aunt that I know. And I called her, and I was like, hey, I have this really big exam I have to take. Do you think you can watch my kids, right? They're little. I'm stressing the morning of this exam to get them over to her.
Did you take this at school, or you actually took it, at the DRE?
At a somewhere over here, like a center where you have
at the DRE office. Yeah. Okay, so that's normal. That's the same as licensing.
Yes. So I went, and I remember sitting there. I'm probably like, I'm one of those test takers that's like, I will sit there till almost the last minute. Not that I go back and answer any or change any of the questions, but I'm like, take your time, right? Yeah. Take your time, because I'm not doing this again. And I remember turning in the exam, and everything checked out. I passed with flying colors. Nice. I was like, shut up. I'm like, oh my gosh. And I remember telling my husband, hey, I got my license. He's like, well, what are you going to do with that? I was like, sell houses. Yeah. So that's how I started.
That's awesome. Well, that's really funny. We I think took it in the same place. One of the funny things is when I first got into real estate, I was told that sometimes older real estates will be like a little bit judgmental of new realtors, and they can tell because of your license number. Because the lower your license number is, and you're lucky because your number must be like pretty
old.
Yeah, not old, but lot lower than what mine is, right? Yeah. So you have that instant like respect, right? Because you're if they're like that in the industry. I don't know. I've never necessarily ran into anybody like that, but you never know, right? Some people are weird about things like that. Yes. When I took my test, I actually had 2 other people that I recruited to get my license with, the 3 of us. So we went through the whole process together. We did like the private course and whatever. And one of my buddies, Randeep, he'll be on the podcast actually at one point. Nice. And he finished it super fast. He's a smart guy. He just retains stuff so quickly. He finished it in like under an hour. It was like hella quick. And I was like, oh my God, like I think I'm gonna fail this, whatever. Right. And then the other guy we did it with had taken it maybe 2 days or 2 weeks earlier, and he had passed. And so Randeep waited for me, and I came out, I had passed as well, but I was super nervous that I wasn't gonna pass. Even though, I mean, like I'd already got a 4-year degree, and I'd already taken other sort of stuff and been certified in things, but the test to me felt like kind of hard.
I agree.
Yeah, I felt like, and it's not necessarily that it's like such difficult information to retain, but it's like there's a lot of stuff about laws, and there's a lot of stuff that's very similar. And the big thing is that these tests are designed to make people fail, right? They want only a certain amount of people passing these. So there's like I think, what's the rate? Like 70% of people fail their first test or something, or 60%, something like that.
I know it's high up there.
And so, yeah, it's so interesting. So that was, like I said, it's funny because I was literally a freshman in high school when you were getting your license to start, right?
Yes, and the wild part of that was at the time, let's see, we bought our house in 2000, closed in 2002, moved in 2003, right at the beginning of the year. So yeah, it's just wild to think about where I started and how it all just kind of came about.
Yeah.
It's my curiosity, like.
Well, I think the interesting thing about that I know about you is that, your main career for a long time was in real estate, right? So you became a nurse. Right. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because I think that that's like a really interesting thing for a lot of people. They don't become a realtor at 18, right? They become a realtor later in their life because in this industry, you have to have a lot of skill sets that people don't really think about to be successful. And you typically haven't developed those yet when you're younger. Some very, very select people, maybe. And then the other thing is like, a lot of people, when you do real estate, they kind of just think like, oh, your only knowledge base in life is real estate because you're a realtor. We define people by their jobs, right? But we forget that they have skill sets that they're bringing into the industry from whatever they did before they became a realtor, right? So I'm very curious about like your experience as a nurse, and I know that you've had you're kind of like a prestigious nurse in like my opinion, like you're very highly regarded and wanted in the field.
Well, it's funny because, like in the nursing world or realm, I feel like I've dabbled in a lot of different areas of that profession. And ironically enough, I started just like as a regular, like floating nurse, a nobody, like on the floor, direct patient care, and got swooped up by directors. I remember being approached by regional directors and being offered a position that would be more of like supervising and overseeing like an actual local facility here. That's a skilled facility in Sacramento, and it's one of like 8 for that company in the region. And at the time I was like, okay, well, what does this job entail? And she's like, well, I know based on, your experience, you have been a realtor, which is kind of like way different, right? But in some respects, there's these certain sets of skills that you possess, right? And she's like, you're really good with people. And I'm like, well, I feel like
Yeah.
that's something that I've developed with time. So I said, okay, well, yeah, I mean, that sounds great. Like, okay, cool. So what am I going to do? And she's like,
Yeah.
well, you'll run, basically we're going to utilize both hats of your skill set, nursing and business, and understanding that you've been in sales and marketing and business development. And we're going to combine that role. Right.
Okay.
So in doing so, I was the clinical admissions director of this facility. Not only did I take on opening a unit that we turned into a subacute, which is for patients that are more like respiratory needs,
Okay.
like ventilators, tracheostomy, things like that, discharging from like ICU level to like a skilled, whether they're short term or the plan to be discharged and go
Right.
home, right? Some of their cases are really sad, and just depending on what the scenario is with the patient. So there was that aspect of me actually clinically going in and meeting with doctors and nurses and whatnot, and checking to see if the patients are eligible for admission to a step down unit like what we are going to build. The other side of that equation was actually rebranding the whole building. And you're talking about a skilled facility that's been well versed and known in this community for 15 years.
Sure.
Under one name. And it wasn't a great reputation.
Yeah.
So they want to completely change it. And I'm talking about change the name of the company or the name of the building, rebrand what we do, and then build the star rating system, which in medical field, there's only 5 stars. So, they're like a 2.
Right.
So to go
So
from
not
2
great.
to 5. So it's not, and how you do this, it's not the metric system for like medical, it's very different. There's so many different elements involved. So you definitely have to work collaboratively with a team. So we had a business development team,
Right.
all the leadership team, administrator, my role, director of nursing, therapy department. I mean, every entity was involved to build this, right? So everybody's got to be hitting their metrics and their numbers, and in order for everyone to achieve these star ratings. And it's guided under Medicare and insurance. It's just a lot. So I learned a lot, basically. And also, not just that, with that, I'm telling you, it was understanding people.
Yeah.
And
Which is
being a
which
people
is our
person.
industry, right?
Absolutely, 100%. And that was one thing that I immediately was able to take with me starting this role, not knowing anything about medical sales or building rapport with, building relationships with people I don't know. I mean,
Right.
I'm talking about Sutter, Dignity, all these hospitals are like, hey, go get them. Go get them and get contracts. And we want to be their preferred provider. Well, guess what? I did all that. But it was not easy. So again, I think that from my early years of real estate and just being so young, like
Right.
I was so young when I got licensed, nobody trusted me. They're like,
Yeah, that's the really tough thing about getting into the industry young, and especially the trust thing, that's huge. But the other thing is, like, you haven't created a lot of connections yet, right? So unless you're like a dynasty realtor where your parents were in real estate and they're maybe passing you some clients or whatever, you have these two things working against you as a younger realtor, which can be really stressful and really difficult. And that's why I think it's so important to, a lot of people don't, the reason I bring up what was your past career, and I'm hoping we're going to be able to kind of translate this, how did this flow into real estate and how does this make you competent in this industry, is that I see so many times, in my capacity of being able to help coach realtors and in my capacity of like working in media, I see all of these brand new realtors of varying ages, right? From their like maybe early 20s into even their 40s who don't know how to get started. And I think one of the key things to really focus on and to understand is, well, you have life experience, right? What can you bring from that past life experience that we can really implement and make your strong suit? And we've talked about this, you and I, right? I said, I've never seen anybody market that they are a realtor for medical professionals.
Yeah, right.
And I think that that's a really unique niche because you understand how, I've had my experience with this, with running the loan sides with nurses and doctors and people in the medical profession. They don't make money always the same way as a normal W-2, right? Because you guys have so much overtime. You guys have, pay that's different if you work at night and all of these, like, if you're in different like difficulties within that industry. And you understand that sort of stuff, right? And you build teams. And so I think that it's so interesting to be able to navigate the real estate market as a realtor from your past experiences.
This is true. And I feel like, as a matter of fact, some of my greatest clients that I've built not only relationships professionally with, but friends,
Right.
are a result of they were employees that I had hired, speech therapists, nurses. And so it's wonderful to be able to build those relationships and then know they see my transition and they've seen it and they reach out to me, Lisa. Like, I want to buy a house. And I'm like, okay, let's go. So it's wonderful. But I think being a nurse, understanding people, being empathetic, and a really good listener, that is a skill I cannot say that I've perfected 100%, but it's definitely something that I've built on and have gotten better at with time, because you have to listen. And that's something that's key.
Yeah.
In everything we do. Because
Well, it's interesting. There's courses and stuff that teach you how to listen, right? Because people don't understand that, like, hearing, and when you get in a marriage or you're in a long-term relationship, you'll learn this. There's a difference between hearing and listening, right?
Yes.
And it is a skill set because we spend more time listening, right? I think they say we spend 90% of our time listening and 10% talking. But we don't know how to listen because we're always thinking about the talking part.
Exactly.
Right?
Right.
It's crazy.
That's the part I'm talking about. It's like you really have to listen, pause, process what the person is saying. Like, what is the message that they're conveying?
Right.
And you are right. There are whole courses, right, that kind of break down communication, the different ways we communicate, whether it's direct through our voice, indirectly body language, right? Phone, text. We have so many forms these days, but you really have to understand, right? And then what message am I conveying back, right? So I have learned that, and I think that with both experiences and both career paths, I really take away that ability to, like, listen to what they are saying to me.
Right.
Pause and think before I respond.
I've noticed with you as well that, like, because we have obviously mutual clients at times where I'm doing the loan side, you're doing the real estate side, and I don't always hear the same things that you hear for them. And you'll explain that to me. You're like, you have to understand that, like, this is how they're feeling, and this is like what they told me, and this is, you explain certain things, and it's only because I haven't, as a realtor, you have more in-depth conversations like that with your clients than you do as a loan officer, right? Our conversations are a lot more like, this is how we can get you financially prepared, and send me these documents, please, via an email, right?
Right.
And so it's very interesting sometimes to, like, get your input on it because you have that unique perspective and empathy and sympathy with these clients you're working with.
Right.
That you're like I think I can really feel it when you deal with clients.
Oh, I appreciate that. And I could say sometimes, it's funny you mentioned that, because I think about some clients in particular and our experiences, and it's like, I do listen to the little details that they share, right? Taking mental notes, and not that I'm just, putting it in my back pocket. If it becomes applicable at a later time, then I'll bring it up, right? But it's always really nice to understand your clients, what their needs are, what their concerns are, what are your fears? Because if we don't tackle those, it's going to be a roadblock or a barrier to our success. Both you and getting into your home, and me as your realtor representing you, right?
Right, exactly.
So I've had to learn to also nurture the relationships. It's really a relationship, truly, in this industry. Because you know what? Our clients can go anywhere. They can talk to anybody, and everybody will offer the same things, right?
Right.
But it's that relationship that you build and the trust that you cannot find everywhere. So I know that I stand by that, and that I take a lot of pride in that, in my work ethic. And I explain that to my clients when I'm working with them, right? I said, there really isn't a such thing as discounting services, and let me tell you why. Because when I work with you, it's not just about making a quick sale.
Right.
This is something that we're going to build, and we're going to develop, and we're going to figure out a game plan for you. And whatever your timeline is, and you and I've gone through these motions too with our clients, right? Whatever that timeline is that's best suited for them, then that's what we're going to roll with, right? That's what we'll go with. We're not going to push them into something they don't really want to do, or it's not in their best interest, right?
Right. And that's obviously that's an ethos that is developed through our brokerage, and we try to bring on people who share that same sort of mentality as it pertains to real estate and home loans. That is not universal across the industry, that I've come to learn. And you learn, if you pay attention, you could actually learn that before you even become a realtor, because when you're taking the test or you're studying for the exams, you'll realize very quickly that there's all these weird laws that are in place, and you're like, why is this here? And you're like, oh, because this group of people cheated this group of people, or this thing happened that caused a massive, recession. And it's all comes down to like an ethics based thing. And the funny thing is with the LO test, there's a very small portion that deals with ethics, but all of the laws that are in place is because of unethical things that brokerages were doing across the country that impacted people, in your communities. And so, that's one of the things that works really well in our partnership. And I'm not obviously going to have like only people from our brokerage on here, and I'm very excited to have other people from other brokerages and hear how they deal with things, right? And I think when you deal with smaller brokerages, this is one of the things that you get, right? You get a more personalized type of person who probably puts their work second to their relationship, right? Yes. It's not about that. When I often feel, and this is at least what I see, that when you work with these larger brokerages, it's often, and we'll get into this later about why this is, but it's often that it's a lot more work driven, right?
Right. Or numbers
Yeah.
and goals. And I think that when you work in that type of industry, more corporate structured,
Right.
which I have, it's all about the numbers. The numbers don't lie, and that's the only thing. You put on projections, and you have to speak to it. You have to speak to your results. So the only way to get results, right, is by your actions, and then following the models that are aligned from you from whoever your leadership team is, right? So yes, it might feel very different because my goals, if I'm driven just solely by numbers, I'm going to be limited on how much time, and attention I'll give you. And then again, I personally like to be very involved with my clients through all of the steps.
Right.
So it's like, okay, so they know they can come to me for all of it.
So something like really caught my attention. You're talking about like communication, listening, right? All of these sort of things. And this is something that I've been contemplating over for about the last month, right? Especially as I've been thinking about like what's the unique defining characteristic of what this podcast is going to be about? What is my experience going to be able to bring to people that are in the industry, maybe even people who are in real estate and home loans that are far more successful according to the numbers, right, than I am. In my background, I have a master's degree in communication. I am, for all intensive purposes, an expert in communication, right? So I've spent my time not only theoretically in the classroom, but also implementing and having my own business for 5 years, being a manager, a team leader, presidents of clubs, things like that, right? And so it's such an interesting thing for you to hear a professional like you who's highly regarded within your field ultimately break everything down to a line of communication, right? And I think that's one of the things that I'm starting to really realize as we bring in new realtors into our brokerage, and they ask us, well, like, how can we be successful? What do we need to do? Lay out the plan, right? And, my background is also in media. And so I often say, well, these are the things that you need to do. And this, I'll shoot you text or whatever, like, hey, how come you're not doing this? Or why aren't you posting that? Or whatever it is. But I think bringing it back and explain, because people, I see the correlation between communication and social media, right? Which ultimately advertising, marketing, sales, things like that. Where because people are starting to grow up in the life where they grow up with social media, they see themselves as proficient or experts in that field. Communication is a lot like that way because we talk so much to each other. We think that we're good enough at communication, right? We speak English, you speak English, I speak English, I have friends, whatever, right? But the truth is that a lot of people, they don't hear the inflection in people's voice. They don't hear the fear. They don't hear people telling them that this is a scary process for them, or for other people that this isn't a scary process for them, and that they've done this a bunch of times and they don't want any bullshit, and they just want you to like figure it out, right?
Right.
And that's what I'm hearing from you, right? You really listen to what's in the subtext of that communication. And I've been thinking how that's so much more important to teach to these newer people coming into the industry, or even people that are in the industry that are having trouble, right? It's, how are you communicating? And it's not just one-to-one, right? Sometimes it's a small group. They come with their spouse or they bring their parents. Oh, yeah. Sometimes we're doing our first time seminars. That's a, small group to a large group setting. You have, how are you communicating through email, through phone calls, through text messages? That's a lot of what our business is. Right. And I don't know if people have personally like done it, but I've gotten mad from communication coming my way from other people. So, I mean, like, what's your sort of take on that? Like, how encompassing that overarching idea is within our industry?
I think it's so critical. And I think that it's funny because I used to be teased by my ex-husband when I would read a text message and I would do it in this certain voice, and he'd be like, really, is that how it reads? And I'm like, well, no, but
I can see you like totally like laughing out loud when you read it. You're like actually laughing out loud.
Right. And I'm like, that's so funny because I think how we read things, it's our interpretation, right? Of how it was sent. So sometimes, like you're alluding to, you can get upset over a message, but the reality is take the emotion out of that, right? The written form, and just take what you read as that's what it is, right? Now, what we speak about one-on-one or in a group setting, now we're paying attention to all the details, right? It's not just the words that I'm saying, it's my body language, it's, the tone, right? That I'm taking, things like that, my facial expressions, all of that matters,
right.
So then you're just kind of taking that all in. And I think that again goes along with experience and developing that skill, and just knowing that I have not perfected it yet.
Right.
I don't think I ever will truly 100%, but if you're open to continuously learning how to perfect, and I refer to it as an art, honestly, because I've taught for years too, about 13 years, adult school for nursing assistant training program. And I too have owned a business of my own, took over that for a few years. And in those experiences as well, again, listening to the students. These are other adults from many walks of lives, from many different professions. My oldest student was 70. And I really was like, are you, to the administrator, is this a joke? Like, are you guys messing with me? Like, why? Why would you do this, right? Yeah. And he was probably one of the biggest struggles I had in class because he challenged everything I said. But, you're my elder. And I was raised in a generation where you respect your elders.
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah, he was ex-military. He was speech pathologist. He had so many hats in his lifetime. And I remember us talking about, like, why each one chose this route, right? Most of them would say it was one or two. Either I had really young ones or really older ones, and it was like career path change, completely changing the direction they want to go. So they're going to start from the scratch because most nursing or medical want you to start at the bottom and work your way up. Okay, that makes sense. Two would be like, oh, my parents are making me do this, right? Or whatever. Okay, fine. For him, he said, I have a 5-year plan. Every 5 years, I lay out my plan, and then I knock it out. And it keeps me going. And this guy rolled in on a Harley Davidson bike.
That's sick.
Know. I was like, I like this one. I think the greatest takeaway was their graduation. And I'll tell you, every time I graduated a group, it was probably every 8 weeks because it was a very consolidated, condensed course, right? But we met like every day of the week. He said, Lisa, I know I was a challenge to you. I know I always gave you a hard time. He goes, but I want to thank you, and let me tell you why. You're a great teacher. Don't get me wrong. He goes, but you really forced me to get out of my comfort zone. I was stage fright. I was deathly afraid of speaking in front of other people. He goes, and you forced me to come out of my box at this age and do that, because everything we do here is hands-on, talking to others. And I would make my students do return demonstrations for their skills, because you had to learn theory and skills, right? So in your testing, you had both, the written version and then your return demonstration of skill set. And you have to pass both to get certified.
Right.
So I thought that was pretty cool. I was like, that's awesome.
That is,
that's
I mean,
an
that
area
sounds,
that I really enjoy.
that sounds like a big compliment,
It
right?
was huge.
So let's jump back into real estate, right? I mean, next year will have had your real estate license for 20 years.
Oh my gosh.
Does that sound right to you? Yeah, 20 years.
Yeah.
So I know that you've kind of taken breaks here and there, but you've kept your license active and you're getting a lot more in the last, let's say 5 years, you've been a lot more active within the industry. And I know that as you and I have worked together, we really have created this dialogue of like you wanting to understand how the mortgage industry works better. And I think that's really critical for a lot of realtors. Don't understand that that's half of their job that they don't actually do, but they can't close a house if their clients can't fund it. Right. And a lot of them just go, well, talk to the LO, right? Talk to the lender. I don't know, right? Let me get a hold of them. They don't know what's going on in that process. Mm-hmm. And maybe if you're a seasoned realtor, you've been in the industry for a really long time and you've dabbled on the other side, you've started to learn that, or you do know it because, what else are you going to do? Eventually, how to do real estate, right?
Right.
Eventually, it's not like super hard rocket science by any means. I mean, don't get me wrong. I do believe realtors are needed because there's a lot of negotiation and legal jargon and things like that go into this process that any normal person would not want to deal with on their own. Mm-hmm. But eventually, as a realtor, you'll learn it in your profession, right? So I think it's really, great that you're starting to branch everything together, and we are working a lot on your media side as well, and you're branching those 3 trifectas together, right?
Right.
So as it pertains to real estate, how are things going? What do you see like going on in the industry right now? I know we're located in Sacramento, California. Right. And so we deal with the Sacramento region, right? Which is all the way, up to, I mean, I include El Dorado Hills, but even though it's not technically in Sacramento County, but El Dorado Hills, all the way out to Elk Grove, all the way up to even Lincoln. I don't know, maybe even like Woodland, even though those technically are not Sacramento regions, but if it's within driving distance, we pretty much will do it, right? So what's it looking like out there?
Well, I mean, when we're talking about houses on the market, like, obviously we think about inventory or whatnot. What's interesting to me, though, is that I think, well, my recent experience with selling a house right when our market just like completely went
shifted. Yeah, that was really rough.
Like oh man, navigating that one was like stressful, right? But at the same time, I knew, Lisa, stay abreast, educate myself, make sure I'm on top of everything so that I can convey these things to my client, right? Mm-hmm. At the same time, being able to navigate the waters throughout that, to not have so much fear embedded into my client that the decision is made, I don't want to do it anymore, right?
Right. And that's one of the unique things about communicating, right? Is like you're not trying to deceive your client, right? But also there's a level of knowledge base that doesn't necessarily concern them, right? Right. With like, hey, the market might crash like any moment. It's like, no, like we're going to navigate what's happening today and we're going to do the best we can. We can't predict the future, even though this is what the narrative is out in the general community, right? And that, I think that's part of being a good salesperson, is understanding that there's a level of communication that needs to be given to your client to be truthful and honest, but also it's your job to provide comfort for them.
Right. And so that in itself, that experience forced me to go back to the drawing table several times and relay my message differently. Yeah. Because every time I presented something, I might have done it in a format of showing you the numbers, right? Showing you recent sales, try to explain, and perhaps that did not resonate with you. It did not process, you didn't absorb it like I thought you would. maybe it even put a little more fear into you. So then I decided, okay, let me go full circle and let me think about another way I could explain this that's more palatable, right?
Right.
So going through that experience, and then also at the same time, you're seeing like these realtors that are putting their houses on the market and they're still having them really highly priced, and you're like, oh my gosh, like I think I joked with you one time, like, dude, I think my phone's broken, like it's not ringing,
Yeah.
like this is freaky.
Yeah.
Now it's becoming more normal, I think, if we're thinking more in terms of a healthy real estate market.
Right.
From the day you put on the market, maybe 3 months down the road, sell is like, okay, that's not crazy.
Right.
But from where we came from
Yeah.
at the beginning of the year up until tail end of May, that's unheard of. That's
All right.
like
So one
scary.
of your, for if you're in the real estate industry, you know exactly what's going on, right? If you're not in the real estate industry, but you're listening to this podcast,
Right.
you probably know what's going on, because why else would you be listening to a real estate podcast, right? But for those of you who may not know, right, we just came from one of the lowest rates drops that we've ever seen in the history of the United States market, right?
Right.
For the longest time, for decades and decades, rates were up anywhere. Like a low rate was 6%. And, there were rates that were 10, 12, maybe even higher, depending on a lot of different variables in there. But that's what it's at. And we had rates go down to, if you were like the best borrower and you went to the best lender, you could have got like a 2.5, right? 2.5% on your house. And we were coming at that from a position where real estate was still, it was appreciating, but not very quickly, right? So houses were still kind of cheap. Rates were dropping down super low. And it's funny because we were telling everybody, hey, you need to jump on this and jump on this. And I was just talking to one of my friends, and it's like, no matter what industry we're in, everybody just thinks we're trying to sell them, right? We're like, hey, this is like never happened before. And they're like, no, it'll get better. Don't worry. I'm like, yeah, well, now it's, and now it's gone up. We're back at anywhere from 6 to 8%, depending on where you're at in the country, while you're borrowing. We're putting a lot of people somewhere around 6% for a normal conventional loan, right? So you had a client who you had started building a relationship with, and then ultimately sold their home in the time frame that rates went from a 2.5 to a 6, right?
Yes.
That was your entire relationship with them.
Yes.
And they wanted to sell a house, they want to buy a house.
Right.
And there was a lot of things going on, but this is, I think, where you have competent and knowledgeable realtors who are willing to put in the time and research and are partnered with people in the industry that can help them be effective in the market, right?
Exactly.
And so you really went through such a unique opportunity, because like you said, a lot of realtors were selling. They were like getting rid of stuff very quickly. Right. It was gone. Or you were a buyer's agent and you couldn't get your offer accepted for whatever. So it was like you weren't doing any work, right?
Yes.
So you had this unique experience where, and even within when we were trying to get this house closed, stuff was shifting, right?
Right.
It was shifting big during that time. And so you've had a really unique experience with that.
I
And
did. And it's one of those experiences where it's like, I will not forget. I will put that under my belt, put another notch in my belt. Like I've done
little
that.
ribbon.
Exactly,
Congratulations.
right? I think that it taught me a lot too, right? About patience. Don't panic, right? And then also, Lisa, you have experience, so draw from your experiences, because I was in business back in 2008, in the last recession.
Right.
And
You've been through two of the most major
yes.
markets,
And
right?
that's where I was able to explain to my clients, I was in business back then, okay? And I do understand what it was like at that time. And it was really scary for a lot of people, right? This is very different, but let me tell you why.
Right.
Okay. So way back then, I was dabbling into what loan processing and stuff was, because my broker at that time, as a newer agent, was a mortgage broker, and so we had both sides. But yes, I mean, very well that people were getting qualified and put into homes they should have never been.
Right.
Or could afford.
Yeah, that was a whole different time.
It was just completely different. I was like, what drove the market to crash is people simply not being able to afford their loans.
As like a normal American who grew up in like, to be the best is to be American and to make $1 million is the dream. I can't help but feel like, man, it would have been nice to be an LO or realtor during those times where like people were making money on money, hundreds of thousands of dollars a month. But on the other side, like,
and the back.
but on the other side, I'm so like, I'm such a guilty person about not doing what's best for people that I don't even know if I would have been able to do it. And in all honesty, like, I'm like, my motivation isn't money. Granted, like I do want to be wealthy and I'm doing those things to like set myself up for life, but I'm not willing to compromise because my happiness is ultimately what's the most important thing. And I am never happy when I don't do what's best for the people I'm around and the people I work for. That's just the way that I'm built.
Oh yeah, I can say ditto to that because I feel like from experiences I've had throughout my career attest to my belief system when it comes to doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Like even at the expense or cost of a commission check, or something. So yes.
But it's interesting because, I my background is in sales, very heavily in marketing and things like that. And the whole driving force behind that is how do we teach individuals to be effective salespeople, right? And that in the very nature of itself is how do we convince others to do something that they maybe just don't want to do, right? Or can really ultimately convince them to what we want them to do. And if you do that at face value, it can't be done ethically. I really believe that. If you do it at face value, which is I'm going to sell this person no matter who they are, what situation they are, and they come in today, anybody on this in my circle, I wanted to say floor because I always related back to selling cars, which for those of you that sell cars, I'm sorry because I know you're not all like that, but I know a lot of people do see it that way. They use car salesmen, right? And like, so the very nature of that and the way that I try to approach and coach people, and I try to do it from a place of, I want you to be good at your job and I don't want you to lose a deal because you're bad at selling, right? And what I mean by selling is, are you conveying what's important to your client in today's market, right? Are you doing that effectively? Are you doing it in a manner that's going to emotionally resonate with them? If you're doing all of that and you're not forcing them to buy something or sell something, then you're a good salesperson and you're doing it ethically in this market. But you have to understand that a lot of times that might come with not getting the dollar today.
Right. And I think that even from that recent experience, also I think it's important to give your client the information that you want to convey to them. Also give them time to process. Don't be so quick to try to pull the trigger or force them into a position of a decision right now because it works for me before I kickstart my weekend or or I got to get this in. I mean, obviously when you're dealing with a transaction, you have timelines to adhere to. I think keeping them well informed and ensuring that they have enough time, right? Yeah. Like I'm not going to come with you with this information today and I need a decision by 5 o'clock.
Right.
It's like I'm going to make sure to schedule time so that you also have time to think about it, process it, and then I'm going to follow up with you. And I will. And so that's part of that communication. And then just, I would like to say that it's like guiding, right?
Yeah.
Give some guidance and a little direction because it feels different.
Right.
It's received better.
But don't take your foot off the pedal, right? I mean, you still have to keep driving, right? That's ultimately, that's the hardest part to navigate. And this is why I keep coming back to that communication aspect, right? Of how do we do this in such a manner that's like professional, but also you have to understand that like if you're not trying to get them to buy this very moment and they need to walk out the door with this item, then it is building a relationship, right? And you want to do that in a way that is ethical.
Right. And I think clearly defining what your role is and what your expectations are too as the realtor, right, is important.
Yeah.
It's important so that they understand that not only are you willing to work and service them and their needs, but you also have a respected timeline to adhere to, and things that your expectations. I always do that with my clients. Like, okay, so here's what I'm going to do, and I'll outline it, and then in turn. And I always put a funny twist on things because that's just my personality type, and I can kind of get away with it. Okay, here's your homework assignment, right? I need you to fill out these paperwork. And then I'm going to need to get those back by this day. Or however you're able to build that relationship with someone where it's comfortable enough to say it, but there's a timeline to adhere to. So that's kind of keeping your foot on the
and you
gas
can
pedal,
be stern in doing this as well, right? I mean, I think a lot of realtors they don't respect themselves enough, or maybe they just don't have enough training to understand that this is your career, right? And you do need to value your time, and every hour that you're spending on this is, a lot. I think there's a misconception about realtors that they're all rich. And that they get paid to do nothing.
Right.
And they make way more money than they should, right? So a good example of this, just from a financial standpoint, if you guys are listening, a typical house in Sacramento has gone up, but we always try to use somewhere between $450,000 and $500,000, right? If you're doing a normal commission based on that house, then you're bringing home maybe about $8,000, $9,000, somewhere around there, right? I mean, I don't have the math, but I'm kind of doing it in my head. You have to remember that we have to pay our taxes on that, right? So, I always put away 40%. I don't know what you put away, but I put away 40% because there's a additional tax for people who are self-employed. So you lose that. Depending on the brokerage you're with, of that first amount that you get, you have to give a percentage to your brokerage. So you lose that off the top. If you hire somebody to do photography and videography and all of that, you lose that off the top. And then you're left with the rest. You get take taxes out, that's gone. So you're typically, most realtors, I'm seeing them somewhere like $6,000, right? Maybe even like $4,000. As an LO, we get paid off of, not from we get paid from the lender. So we get paid the loan amount, and we get a bigger portion goes to the brokerage, and then a smaller portion. So I get 1%, right? Where a typical realtor gets 2.5 to 3%. So where you're taking home maybe $6,000, I'm taking home $3,000. So I don't know about you, but that's not a lot of money. If you create a relationship, let's say, we're in September, I meet someone in September, very, very rarely are they going to come to me and say, I have a 750 credit score, I have $80,000 saved, and I'm ready to put an offer on a house tomorrow, right? And I know exactly where it's at. And I just happened to walk by there, see the realtor. They said no offers are in, and it just went on the market this morning. I mean, doesn't happen. Yeah. So we spend, typically a month to 3 months nurturing a relationship, if not longer. For me as an LO, I nurture relationships from 12 to 24 months before, because that's a lot of times for how long it takes people to get their financial stuff in order, right? But let's say for a realtor, that's 3 months, another month to 3 months looking for properties, and then another 21 days to 45 days to close on it if your offer gets accepted, right? And you think about all the research, all the time, all of the paperwork, and then a lot of people don't understand this. There's 15 people involved in this transaction that the realtor and the LO have to constantly call up to ask if they're doing their jobs and when we're going to get it and whatever, right? And so all of that stuff starts, and this isn't like sad me, I'm a realtor, I don't make money like thing, but it's this sort of idea that as a realtor, your job is to ethically approach this and do what's best for your client, but also respect your time, respect your space, and set up like Lisa said, set up a timeline for these people, make it easy for them to do what's best for them as well. Right? Especially right now where rates are going up. Yes. The longer they wait, the worse deal for them is. And unfortunately, a lot of people are getting priced out of homes because they're waiting so long. They're not being aggressive. And this just isn't the market for that. In some markets, that's fine, but this isn't the market for that.
Right. And so I think with going along with the thought of timelines, as a realtor, I would say probably one of the greatest things I had learned early on was to respect my own time and have set timelines. Like, I'm not going to pick up your call at midnight. That's not going to happen within a reasonable hour. But yeah, I think there's a lot that you can glean and learn, you know, and just, collaborating with those that have experience.
Right.
And just like our relationship continues to build and grow, we learn from each other and to perfect our arts.
So, we're getting close to being done, but I did want to touch a little bit on any advice that you have for potential clients out there, right? People that are interested in the real estate market, looking for maybe their first time home, maybe they're trying to upgrade their home, or they're looking for an investment property. What does it look like right now, and what sort of services should they be looking for in their realtor, in their loan officers, to make competent decisions?
I would say for any potential clients, investors, anyone looking, in the real estate world, to make a purchase or even sell, is look for those, as ourselves, that have experience and knowledge, right? Because anybody can sell you anything, but it's also, if you're even thinking about taking the next step, for example, buying a house, okay, so you have to start the conversation. Right. Because there's no way you're going to be able to pull the trigger unless you know exactly where you stand today, and whether that timeline is in 4 weeks or 4 months, right? You have to start with the conversation. And so I feel very strongly when you initiate the conversation or you have it with someone who can outline exactly where I am today and what I need to do to get to the next level. That's so critical.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. People are, and I get it, it's super scary to think about buying a house, especially in the sort of world now where the narrative is live in a van and travel.
I've heard this.
Yeah, I get it, right? I understand that, but also it's scary for people because it's like you're letting people in on your finances. And if you're not good at finances, you're letting people in your bad problems, your bad habits, things like that. And here's the deal, like, I care about getting you in a house, but I don't care how you spend money. That's not my business, right? I just have to look at the big picture. And so when we look at these sort of things, the biggest regret I have is, why didn't you come to me sooner? If you would have came to me 3 months earlier and you would have just said, hey, I'm looking at a 6-month timeline, then I could have set you up on a plan to be in such a bigger position. And the example that I use is I had a client who had a 619 credit score, and it cost them to get the worst loan they could get, cost them $2,500. If they would have just gone up to a 620, 1 point higher on their credit score, they would have got $500 back for closing cost. That's the difference, a $3,000 swing on 1 point, which we could have easily resolved in that 3-month period, right? So I think you hit it, on the nose. I mean, I think we're going to have a series, you and I, we're going to talk a lot more about, our views on real estate and really dive into how can we help other realtors, how can we help, clients. But for a starting point, yeah, if you're thinking about buying a house in the next 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, you really need to talk to somebody who understands what's going on and can take a look at your finances and start to scope out communities for you to set you up on what you need.
Yes, agreed.
So we're about done. Thank you so much for being on. I don't know if there's anything else you want to end on. Anybody, maybe you want to throw out your Instagram or something like that.
Listings by Lisa. Oh, no, listings _by _Lisa.
Yeah, don't forget the underscores, guys. There's
forget it.
2 of them there. Thank you so much for being on. I'm very excited that we finally had time to do this thing we've been trying to do for like 6 months.
Yes.
So finally had some time and a lot more to come, guys. Thanks again. Again, you guys are here with the Hard Money Show where we talk about real estate, home loans, and media. You guys have a good one. Bye.
Bye.